Today we have Quentin Fisher. Quentin is the CEO and founder of HC Analytics and QuantQ Technologies, cloud-based AI companies focused on healthcare, manufacturing, and marketing. So Quentin's epiphany, the digital solutions that he'd been building for close to a quarter of a century, and he doesn't look that old, across 90 plus clients, thanks to the cloud, are now accessible to everybody, especially the mid-market. We want to drill down into that. Real exciting. So his previous roles include Global Business Analytics Services Leader for HCL, Axion, and CSC, which is now DXC, where he managed ERP and analytics consulting and business portfolios of $100 million. And it's super big stuff. Welcome to the SMB Summit, Quentin.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. This is going to be fun. So what got you interested in AI? You have an interesting sort of backstory, the way you arrived at this point, running your own SaaS companies. Let's talk a little more about your epiphany. What's your backstory?
I guess my backstory is I never really liked IT that much. I was an industrial engineer coming out of school, so I did a lot of operations research. And then I really got into this whole area of advanced planning and optimization. So that was, some pretty heavy math and really doing that. So I was a supply chain guy, doing a lot of supply chain work. It was very practical, right? Very results driven. And then kind of moved into the ERP realm. And then, of course, had to learn BI, business intelligence. Worked with a couple organizations. We went and actually bought this cloud-based big data company, and then I was working in industry, and I had to learn what Droff and Scoop and Flume and Kafka and all these things are. I was like, what are you talking about? And, and try to figure out how that inserted it into the industrial world, and it actually took a while for it to nestle in. But then, as things evolved, of course, what are you going to do with all that big data? It's AI and machine learning. So that from that we then kind of morphed into more machine learning to take advantage of that, and that's where we really saw the value. But it was always from a very practical sense. I was always kind of this non-typical IT guy. I always had this business bent versus a classic, computer scientist guy going up. So it's always a bit of an odd duck, but I always had a different take on it. So I complimented the team well a lot as we went through that. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Oh, that's awesome. It's super interesting. So, the best way I can ask this is almost like share a quick couple sentences. When I was a kid, my dad liked to work on cars, and he felt like that this was sort of a life skill that a young person needed to learn how to work on cars. And I would be playing whatever game, football or whatever, in the front yard, and I was like, Dad, cars will fly. I don't need to learn how to work on cars. And he convinced me to learn a little bit about it at least. And the funny thing is, number one, you can't work on them now. But until Tesla kind of disrupted things just a few years ago, they really haven't changed that much. From when I was a kid, the ability to get from here to there and do things like that hasn't changed that much at all. But tech and AI is an area where you go, oh, this is the way, the way it was on television when I was a kid. You talked to your house and the lights turned on and off.
The Jetsons, exactly.
Exactly. So that said, so AI seems like, and I think this tails on to what you were talking about earlier too, is AI seems like this lofty enterprise discussion. And in our sort of side conversations leading up to this SMB event, you said you believe that AI is becoming much, much more attainable for the SMB client. How so?
Yeah, well, I think I was, back to kids and that. So I was even just today or yesterday talking to my daughter a bit about how fast technology is moving. And it's kind of like we're in the midst of this coronavirus, but everybody now understands what exponential growth is, right? It doubles and it doubles and it doubles and it doubles. And I was explaining to her that that's the same thing that's happening in the tech world. It's Moore's law, except it's a bunch of other things. It's not just Moore's law. It's a bunch of other things put in together with that, and it's even faster. And I was explaining to her that your life is going to change so much. If we look at our grandparents and our parents and see how much life is going to change for the kids, it's just unbelievable. We almost can't comprehend it. And a big part of that is because of this exponential growth of technology. So how does all that kind of come to reality is that I think this is moving so much faster than people realize. It's deceptive how fast it's moving, and it's accelerating, which is the crazy thing. But let's just look at, I think, two big shifts that really made AI truly accessible was the first one was the cloud, and that took a long time to kind of come through and develop. And initially, once again, it was deceptive and not really that big a deal, but now it's totally disruptive, right? And now think about it, storage is so cheap in the cloud, so cheap. The other thing is compute. You don't have to buy these $1 million machines anymore. It's on demand. You turn it on, you turn it off. So you got this super cheap storage and this compute that's basically on demand. So that's the first thing. And then once everything's in the cloud, people started then building software tools to help build models easier. So now you can build machine learning models literally drag and drop. Right? There's some very sophisticated platforms and applications out there that you don't need to have 10 years of Python to develop an AI model anymore, right? You can literally do it by understanding some basic statistics and learning an application a bit. You can build a number of machine learning models. And actually, it's the only way to do it, because now you can start building these at scale. You can't do these without a platform, right? So it's actually the only way to do it. And then they started. So anyways, these two things, the cloud coming, that's really making it super cheap, right? And then you have these platforms that make it really accessible with drag and drop. It really brings the price barrier down for folks, but B, it also brings in the business users, the subject matter experts. Now they can start understanding the problems and starting to build the models. You don't need to, once again, have 10 years of development experience in order to do this. So that's really what's making it accessible, right? And then, of course, it's about finding the right solutions that you need to be building these things around.
That's awesome. So I don't have to know linear algebra to get going.
Yeah, and you can pick, there's 12 different models up there. Let's try them all, right? Versus having to code them all up. I mean, and then there's all these platforms do this amazing stuff, the hyperparameter tuning and all this stuff that literally was so labor intensive before is just all automatic now. And some folks are like thinking it's a little dangerous because you should have some knowledge. It's kind of like you have to know what it's doing, right? That's why I think it's actually more important with machine learning models to really have a solid math and statistics understanding, right, than it is to have a heavy tech background. Exactly, because they've taken care of the programming, and it's really important that you understand the data and then what the models are doing, right? Instead of having to figure out how to do it, understand what and why you're doing it, right? So it's a different paradigm. Anyways, that's what's making it much more accessible for the for the experts in the area. And I think it's going to change a bit what the profile of the there's my daughter.
Are you on a video?
I am, yeah.
This has already happened many times.
Yeah, this is COVID-19. We're working from home, right? So
yeah, I've got a sticky note on my office door that says recording that I put up there now, or on camera.
So
it's all good.
So anyways, it's much more accessible. And I mean, these high school kids can build machine learning models now, and I'm trying to get them into doing it, but they don't listen to dad. So that's a different story.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you and I were talking before, you talked about an action platform. Could you unpack that a little bit for me?
Sure. Well, I think that, it's really about having a great insight is great, but it's kind of like navel gazing unless you do something about it. So I mean, it's very important to be action oriented and with any analytics. And I think that you can't turn this into a science project, and especially in the mid-market. I mean, nobody's got the budget for that, right? So you really need to have these use cases that drive real results. So what we've done is we built out this AI action platform, and it has really four main pillars to it, right? And there's some really interesting things that make this anybody can use this, and it's only possible now. It really wasn't possible 3 or 4 years ago. So the first step is building out a data lake, and people are like, well, what's a data lake? Well, there's some technologies that came from Google and Yahoo and all that stuff, and it's basically this unstructured data. What that allows you to do is very easily have data from your whole enterprise, your whole organization in one spot, right? And it's very easy to manipulate. Right? It's not these classical warehouses that you have. You build a lake, and then you structure the data when you read it, right? So that's the first step, and it really makes the access. You just dump the data in, and then you only pick the 5% of the data that you want to focus on. That's what you structure, instead of having to structure 100% of the data just to put it in somewhere. So it totally changes it. That way, it's much more agile, right? So because lots of times you don't know what you want to look at until you see the data. Well, then how are you supposed to structure the data if you don't know what you're looking for? It's kind of you have to predict the future to build a warehouse, right? It doesn't work, right? So load it into the lake and then structure when you read it. And then as you learn, you restructure, you add more, all this stuff. And it's much more agile. You can put in all this text data, semi-structured data, structure. So these are the new things that, and this is how they kind of catalog the web, right? So we use those tools now are, sufficiently mature that the enterprise can use them, right? And once again, it gives you a nice, clean view of your whole organization. So that's the first pillar. And then the second pillar are these robust visualizations, right? So you've probably heard a lot about visual intelligence, but all these new dashboard capabilities are just wonderful. And they take that data out of the lake and they build it into something called a tabular model. And it's kind of like Excel on steroids. It allows you to slice and dice data very easily, and it brings forth this whole era of self-service analytics. So once again, people can then manipulate their own data. They don't have to go back to IT to ask for the report to look at it this other way or that way or this way, and it never happens. And then they, those IT guys don't know what I'm talking about. You can't communicate. The point is, when you structure the data into this tabular model out of your lake, then you can slice and dice it any way you want. So these subject matter experts, these business users, get a much deeper and richer perspective on the data. And it's IT's job to really stage the data so that they can then, manipulate it and slice and dice it. So that's the second kind of key pillar. And then once you have that and you have that data, well, then you know what's in there, then you can start building machine learning models. And this is where these machine learning platforms come in, right? And once again, there's literally drag and drop capabilities within these machine learning platforms. So as we just discussed, you don't need to, be a 10-year Python expert to do this, right? So you can, and what we found, it's much, much more important to have a more basic model, but a much broader set of data, right? More data beats a better algorithm, right?
So you can learn.
Absolutely. And more data is going to give you different perspectives on the problem, right? And there's this whole kind of mathematical Bayesian theorem that says, hey, if you're looking at something from multiple different angles, you're going to get a much more robust perspective and solid model on it, right? Versus just having data from one angle, right? So more data beats, an algorithm, right? But these algorithms are now, they can be quite sophisticated, right? And there's a lot of intelligence behind them and tools behind them. They take a lot of the hard work out of the tuning the models. Not so that's the third pillar with these machine learning platforms. And then the fourth pillar and final pillar is really what we're calling the automation and defining your next best action. Right? Because if you come up with the insight, but you don't figure out what to do about it, once again, it comes back to navel gazing, right? And that's almost one of the hardest things, because we're able to do some things, and we've been doing some work in the healthcare space, and we're able to be able to predict no-shows for some of these facilities. And, it was actually took the organization is a long time to figure out, so what are you going to do if this appointment has a 52% probability of showing up? And it will be accurately 52%. And this other one's going to be a 92% probability of showing up, So what would you do about that? And at the same time, then it's still statistics, and it's just either going to be a 1 or a 0. So how should we change our schedule, and how should we manipulate that? How should we change our engagement strategy and all these things? So there's all these business rules that then you want to start layering on top of that, right? These next best actions, right? So if this, then that. So it's almost like this little heuristic that you're building on top of your AI, right? To figure out what to do next. And then, of course, you need to kind of embed that into your existing systems, right? So that classically was a big pain because of this whole integration and all this stuff. But now there's these new products and these new tools out called robotic process automation. If there's not an easy way to hook into your system, like they have these things called APIs, right? You could just update it. If that doesn't exist, you can actually have a robot, right? Have a screen just like you or I would, and it would go in and make a decision to turn left or to turn right, hit this button or hit that button based on the algorithm and these rules that you put in place. So it can actually go in and update the systems. So it can seamlessly go in and update. And these things are super easy to program. I mean, you basically hit the record button, and then you go on your screen and you do like you or I would do, right? And then stop, and then you just trigger that whenever you're at that stage in the process. So you're using the graphical user interface, right? The screen as your input, right? Which once again, only the past, I'd say 2 years, has that been robust enough to really allow that. So all this stuff is kind of this. So with these 4 kind of pillars, now you have this AI action platform, and it doesn't. Once again, these are not big long projects, right? Basically, you need to get the data that you're looking at, load it into the lake, look at it with these visualizations so you understand it, build out some initial models, and then update it into your existing system based, and you figure out what these rules are to take advantage of that insight, and then update your existing systems. And the whole idea is to make these light and agile and learn by doing. Pick a pilot site, learn what's going on, because the biggest challenge won't be the technology. I guarantee you that. The biggest challenge will be on the change management, on getting people to be comfortable with this and start to augment their processes with AI. That's always the toughest thing. So I would argue, don't let the technology hold you back. The trick is, how do you make sure that you can define a project and really start to get the users to adopt and work with these new tools, right? So that's kind of the AI action platform. And it can be used basically on anything. These components are, it's regardless of the industry, but you have to, of course, understand what what use case you're building it around, right?
You pointed out a couple things that were really interesting to drill into, and one I knew about because I knew about your healthcare solution, and that one seems especially relevant today because it seems like you can't turn on, go on the internet or turn on the TV or whatever without somebody talking about capacity for healthcare. And I know it's a little bit different conversation, but at the same time, if you can predict if somebody's going to show up or not, you can effectively manage your capacity, which means that you can see more people who are really, really sick. And there's a whole other business results side to that conversation. So it's really exciting. So what happened? So I think you've tried this some. What happens when they do optimize their schedule?
Yeah. I mean, it's actually quite amazing. I mean, well, what we've been able to do is build this model so we could predict the no-shows and then figure, okay, what's an intelligent schedule based on these rules? And it's really 1 + 1 is 3, right? Because it's not just a prediction, but it's also the standard way of building a schedule, because everybody just does whatever they want, so you get benefit on both ends. You're getting lift from having a predictive model to do certain things in certain situations, and you get in a standard way. So what we've seen at least a 20% increase in capacity with these health facilities.
Amazing.
Which is that's just, and but we're all consumers in this industry, so we're like, I can see where there's 20% capacity. Come on, it's just, so I mean, it's amazing, but we all know that the state of the healthcare operational, footprint, it's terrible, right? But anyways, we ended up putting this in place, and that actually created another problem, because all of a sudden, with this new capacity, these health centers were able to burn through their backlog, and they always had for decades had this wait list to get in, right? Because they couldn't hire new people because the margins were so low and all this stuff, and right? And all of a sudden, boom, they had extra capacities. They're like, well, now you have to reach out to your patients. Who should you be reaching out to? So then it kind of pivoted it from a kind of a supply constrained mode, right? So all of a sudden they didn't have enough demand. And so we ended up kind of then putting in a whole solution around CRM and how to reach out to the right patients and really how to do that, and who should you be reaching out to. Now, what are all these things that you wanted to do that you couldn't before, and now you have this extra capacity. So it was kind of a really interesting thing, and we've seen huge improvements in some of their gross margins. It's just been phenomenal, because basically that new revenue, these new visits that came in, had no cost, because you're already staffed up, right? So huge improvement in gross margins. And it, one client of mine actually gave their therapist a 40% raise if they use the new scheduling system. And I mean, it's like, so this is how, and this is an organization, in the neighborhood of $50 million a year revenue, right? So these are not huge.
Of SMB,
yeah. These are not huge organizations, right? But big enough to have some real meaningful benefit. And these guys, millions of dollars added to the bottom line. So that's the kind of the essence of how this is really practical and attainable, right? And the biggest challenges, once again, are getting the folks to adopt these technologies to augment their current processes, right? It's not technology; it's about getting the people to kind of adopt it, right? That's of course always the biggest hurdle, right?
That's a keen spot for my little firm. is focusing on that. So it's interesting how for many years the business, as the business, we had all the information, and you talked about this convergence of all these events that happened that and the coronavirus will never go back, and before that was the cloud, social, mobile, that all those technologies came together all at one time, and it pushed the balance of power over to the consumer. It used to be we had all the information, and now the consumer has all the information, and we're on the other side with kind of older clunky systems, and consumers at home walking around with Alexa and talking to their phones and stuff, and we have these at work, we have these big long forms we're using in healthcare and other industries too. So it seems like that AI is, if we can get people to buy in, can give business leaders a new level of context that they never had before. Is that fair to think?
Yeah, I think there's, yeah, so absolutely. They're going to have, if you have, absolutely, right? So you're going to have a lot more information, and you're going to be able to help your patients, your customers out to a greater degree than you have ever been able to before, right? And I think the question is, how do you apply this, or where do you apply this, right? And I think it's very important to think about areas of your organization where you are differentiated. Not, are you customer intimate? Are you a product innovator? Are you operationally excellent? Right. So those are kind of the big three ones, and then really think through where do I differentiate in the marketplace against my competitors? And I think this is where you want to start thinking about applying these tools and techniques, right, to kind of further differentiate you, right, versus some commodity area like processing your bills faster or something, or unless you're in that business, right? So so I think it's important to think about where this would really differentiate you and drive better customer retention, adoption, margin, all these things is important to kind of think through that. And then, and then I would say in order to kind of go after that, you would just then first make sure that within those processes, you have a good grasp of your process capability, and you start managing the process with data, and then really kind of think through, right, using your imagination a bit, what if I knew X? If only I could do this, then I could do that, right? So you have to kind of think a bit about how you can, you almost dream a bit, because it's almost it's an imagination, right? If you could combine this data or that data, or if you knew certain things, that's where you want to focus in. And then, of course, thinking through, if I did know it, right, and I did, well, what would I do about it, right? Because that's a hard thing to answer, because you've never had to answer that question before, so we find that that's kind of tricky. And then what you end up doing, of course, is just asking better and better questions once you kind of get that, and that kind of takes you up to an upward spiral.
That's awesome, man. Well, it seems like the best place to get started might be the questions you ask, right?
Oh yeah. And it's going to start off real basic, right? And you first just get that situation awareness, right? And then once you get that, then you can start kind of moving up the maturity curve in your questioning, right? So
this is an incredibly fascinating topic. Well, it's like we could talk for hours. Well, you could talk and I would listen for hours. But so if folks want to hear more about how to do this, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, well, reach out to Quentin at hcanalytics.net. That's Quentin at hcanalytics.net. You could go to hcanalytics.net and just check out what we've been doing in the healthcare space. But of course, we're doing more and more now in manufacturing and marketing, as well as we're starting to broaden out with that with our other QuantQ Technologies entity as well. So, but yeah, have a check out there, and love to get some feedback from you guys and see if you find it interesting. And I think that I kind of started these organizations with the spirit of really democratizing, access to AI and machine learning, right? I was just like, there's no reason. I was doing all this work with these Fortune 500 firms, and I was working on my laptop. And I just like, I got the same solution on my laptop as that they have, the exact same solution. It's just that I'm paying $25 a month and they're paying 25,000 a month, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same solution. And I was like, well, why can't more mid-market companies? They can use this too. So the point is, you can absolutely use it. And if you're, this, as we started this thing off, this technology is moving so fast. So don't be ashamed of not kind of realizing how accessible it is. This is moving so fast, and it really is attainable, and it can drive real hard benefits. And I think the mid-market's the perfect home to have some really tangible results from this stuff, and really kind of you can leapfrog, I think, your competition a lot more, because if you can get this data, you're much more agile, right? And you can pivot and you can accelerate a lot more than the big guys. And now you can use the same tools that they've had as well. So it's kind of really it's really kind of balancing things out. They no longer have the big moat, right? You have access to the same tools.
So it's interesting. I know we're at the end of our time. A way that I'm thinking of it as a non-AI guy is a lot of times clients for years have come to me in whatever role I was in, thinking I need to do this more efficiently. And I keep, for a long time I've thought, the world is changing, and I'm not so sure you're going to out efficient Amazon.com, but you might figure out how to know your client better and serve them more elegantly than Amazon.com, and no shot at Amazon, but at that type of a business. And I think what you're suggesting to a mid-market company is you can use this to know your client and run your business better and build a wall around your clients.
Absolutely. And then if you have a data set, right, a unique data set that you've built over the years, and you can then mash that up with some other things, you can have a very unique perspective, right, that no one will have, right? So I think that, it really, and much deeper insights. And so absolutely, right? So once again, it's finding that kind of use case that really separates you apart. And then, like I say, stand on the shoulders of these giants and don't try and compete with them, right?
Absolutely. Makes great sense. Quentin, Thank you so much for joining the SMB Virtual Summit. You did great.
Okay, well, thanks,
very
everyone.
Insightful to me. Thanks so much.
Yeah, nice talking to you all. Bye-bye.